Ozzie and Harriet, a television program that symbolized an era when mom stayed home, dad went to work, and all seemed right with the world. Welcome to Tvography, our look at classic shows and the stars that made them great. Tonight, Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, real people who lived in a mythical world without anger, divorce, or dysfunctional families. They were the golden couple in the golden age of television, and millions of Americans couldn't get enough. What we didn't know was that the Nelsons' home life didn't always match the television version.
Your name's Carolyn, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Oh, my name's Dave Nelson.
The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, starring the entire Nelson family.
For 22 years, they visited our homes on radio and television.
What we had with the Nelsons family was the ordinary problems that people still face today.
Say, have we got any Tutti Frutti ice cream out in the freezer?
Not unless you put some in there. Why?
That's why when I watch Seinfeld, I think of the Nelson show a lot. Because they just take a very simple thing and who stole the cookies? Where are the cookies? And they could do 20 minutes on cookies, you know.
You sure you want to hear it? It's rock and roll, you know.
I'm walking, yes indeed I'm talking.
I wonder if people today realize that how really big he was. It was overwhelming. It really was.
I spent my whole life trying to fight that fairy tale, you know, first trying to be it and then trying to just tell the truth.
There's a huge discrepancy between what was real and what people think was real about the Nelson family and about the people involved.
The television Nelsons, who many considered the 1950s ideal American family, were in fact patterned after the family of Ozzie Nelson's turn-of-the-century childhood. George Waldemar Nelson, the father of America's favorite family, was the first American-born son of Swedish immigrants. He made a living as a clerk at Chase National Bank in New York City, but he made his mark in his off hours as a tireless public servant, semi-pro football player, boxer, and amateur entertainer. Billed as Jersey City's honey boy, George Nelson appeared in minstrel shows, doing material made popular by Broadway's first black star, Burt Williams. Jack of all trades George also took a correspondence art course, probably to impress a girl he'd met at an amateur show. Ethel Irene Orr pounded her own brand of ragtime piano and sang in a husky voice. George and Ethel formed the act of Nelson and Orr and performed boy and girl duets all over New Jersey. In March of 1903, it became Nelson and Nelson. A year later, son Alfred joined the act, and on March 20th, 1906, so did Oswald. The family settled at 370 Teaneck Road in Ridgefield Park, New Jersey. Ozzie enjoyed a boys will be boys childhood, distinguished by the constant presence of music. At age 5, Ozzie joined his brother to perform singing sketches between acts at their parents' amateur shows. Shortly before his 13th birthday, he had already made Eagle Scout.
I was not quite big enough and not quite fast enough, and there always seemed to be other guys who had more native talents than I did, and it seemed to me that I had to try that much harder.
My brother Al, who was much more mechanically inclined, built this elaborate erector set. And when it came time to have himself photographed, Ozzie insisted on being in the picture. And Ozzie tells it on himself is that, you know, he didn't want to be upstaged that much by Al. So he was looking out for himself from the very beginning.
Ozzie Nelson's future wife was born Peggy Louise Snyder on July 18th, 1909 in Des Moines, Iowa, the only child of professional entertainers. Her father, Roy Snyder, who used the stage name of Roy E. Hilliard, directed and starred in stock theater companies throughout the Midwest. One of those companies featured a doe-eyed Iowa girl, Hazel Dell McNutt, soon to become Mrs. Roy Snyder. When young Peggy Louise joined her parents on the road, she performed. For the most part, the future symbol of American family stability was raised by an aunt and grandmother, but mostly by the Sisters of St. Agnes Academy in Kansas City.
Her family, they were actors, and they were traveling actors. And rather than look at it and you know, be in therapy for 50 years because your parents weren't around when you were a kid, Harry would say, you know, it was so fantastic because I was around creative people all the time.
Any illusion of stable family life ended when Roy and Hazel permanently separated. In 1925, 16-year-old Peggy Louise Snyder and her mother pulled up stakes for New York City, where Peggy Lou attended school and took dance and acting lessons. Along the way, she adopted the stage name Harriet Hilliard and quickly became the family breadwinner.
My father sends me to old Rutgers.
The year before Harriet arrived in New York, Ozzie Nelson had won a scholarship to Rutgers University. He was an excellent student, but weighing a slight 131 pounds, he considered his biggest achievement 3 seasons on the varsity football team. Ozzie spent his 21st birthday at the bedside of his father. George Nelson died on March 20th, 1927, of complications from a rare bone disease. He was 48. The local paper called his multifaceted life applied religion. Ozzie called him his lifelong inspiration. Ethel Orr Nelson suffered a nervous breakdown after her husband's death, and Ozzie and Al took turns caring for their 2-month-old brother Donald until she recovered.
And she never had another caller. There was never a date. I mean, she said to me on numerous occasions, I had the best, and that's all.
Ozzie was a decent student at Rutgers Law School who supported himself and his family by leading a band, remarkable because he couldn't read music. Constant bookings forced him out of law and into entertainment full-time.
My days have grown so lonely.
When Ozzie Nelson sang, he styled himself after Rudy Valley, the most successful crooner of the day. Ozzie's facsimile act landed him on a New York radio show.
I never tried to say, what do I think the public would like? I tried to have us play the music that I liked, and fortunately, enough of the public liked it too.
All of these bands had come out, you know, the Benny Goodmans and Casa Loma, and these bands had come out and they'd bang, 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 and the kids would come and stand around the dance floor, and then they'd go home. With Ozzie used to say, look, I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to play chink, 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 because those people can dance to that. Chink, chink. So that's the style made us famous.
I've got those, oh, what an easy job you got. All you do is wave a stick blue.
And he really wasn't that much of a musician. I mean, he played a little saxophone and he played a little banjo, and he didn't really read music. And yet, you know, here's the guy making his living with an orchestra. You know, it was incredible.
Ozzie Nelson always balanced a renegade spirit with a moral conservatism. A lifelong teetotaler, he did not tolerate heavy drinking or smoking, particularly with women. Harriet Hilliard, who smoked and later enjoyed a vodka before dinner, appeared in her first Broadway play at 16. Then sang, danced, and acted her way through New York. She worked 4 times at the legendary Palace Theater, known as the Taj Mahal of vaudeville.
She was a babe in the 30s, you know. She hung out at the Cotton Club and wore bias-cut dresses on the bandstand without any underwear, because you couldn't wear underwear. You'd have panty lines. And, you know, she had platinum blonde hair and smoked Marlboros from the time she was 13, and she took care of herself, and she took care of her mom, and she knew how to take care of herself.
In 1930, Harriet Hilliard married vaudevillian Roy Sedley, a baggy pants comedian with a fondness for alcohol. She left him after 1 year.
And you'll remember me.
On On New Year's Eve, 1931, the Ozzie Nelson Orchestra performed at New York's Edison Hotel. Announcing the acts and performing a specialty dance was Harriet Hilliard. She must have made an impression. 4 months later, she and Ozzie met at Sardi's restaurant, where he hired her to become the first girl singer in a big band. His idea was to perform boy-girl duets, just as George and Ethel Nelson had done.
Say, what's the name of this song?
Why don't you fall in love with me?
That's what I thought.
Let's you and I elope tonight. I'll wear my zoot suit.
Well, I was going to the movies, but you are kind of cute, it says here.
You know, I can...
Ozzie called upon his legal skills to help Harriet end her marriage to Roy Sedley. From the beginning, what they sang to each other, they meant.
Why don't you fall in love with me? And while Joe is sailing through space, Harriet and I will sing, Put On an Old Pair of Shoes.
During their run on the radio show, Ozzie and Harriet began to engage in little comedy bits with comedian Joe Penner. Ozzie somehow got his 8-year-old brother Donald into the act.
It was just, I wasn't a professional. I wasn't, you know, and Oz just had the confidence in his family so that he felt that they could do anything, and you might as well get used to doing it because that's what was going to happen.
On October 8th, 1935, Ozzie Nelson married Harriet Hilliard in his mother's Hackensack apartment. 1 week later, Harriet left with her mother for Hollywood to make her screen debut in a film starring Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers.
You are watching Ozzie and Harriet.
In 1936, Harriet Hilliard came to Hollywood thinking she was going to make a low-budget potboiler called 12 O'Clock Courage. Instead, she replaced Irene Dunne as Randolph Scott's love interest in Follow the Fleet, which became an Astaire Rogers classic for its studio RKO. Harriet and Ginger became lifelong friends, the latter writing on her photograph, "To that blessed child Harriet, whom I predict but tremendous things."
There were many times that she wondered what would have happened to her career if she had, you know, not married. If she had done what her friend Ginger Rogers did, for example, and stayed at RKO, and, you know, but she was ultimately happy with the choice that she made, obviously. She really loved her family.
David Ozzie Nelson was born in New York City on October 24th, 1936. Most newborn babies don't look too good, Ozzie wrote, but David looked good right from the start. Put a cigar in his mouth and you had Winston Churchill. 2 months after David's birth, Harriet returned to Hollywood to make a pair of musicals. In her absence, trumpeter Holly Humphreys, a camera buff, produced a short film starring David Nelson. Worried that his son is bald-headed, Ozzie enlists a doctor with a miracle tonic for hair growth. Doing Right by David qualifies as the first Nelson family situation comedy. The year after David's birth, the Nelson family and band moved to Hollywood to appear in a new radio show called Seeing Stars, where Ozzie and Harriet engaged in a friendly banter with celebrities. Trumpeter Holly Humphreys recorded an extraordinary procession of talent. But Seeing Stars ended after 1 season. The Ozzie Nelson family and orchestra once again called New York home, but the band continued its grueling tours around the United States. In its 14-year run, the Nelson Orchestra scored 38 hits. The winning on-stage rapport continued during off hours. Between gigs, the band members and their wives stayed together, often at the beach because athletic Ozzie loved the ocean. No big band was ever healthier than the Nelson Band.
Ozzie had a rule that you couldn't get drunk before 11 o'clock. That was a rule. If you did, you get fined $50. But this drummer, you could always tell when he'd had a drink because he'd start hitting the bass drum too hard. And Ozzie'd say, Joe, $50, you know.
In the little novelty songs he wrote, Ozzie drew on his experiences, like the time he needed a musician right before a show. It became a minor hit, and still has the longest and probably hardest to remember title of any record ever made.
I'm looking for a guy who plays alto and baritone and doubles on a clarinet and wears a size 37 suit.
2 months after Ozzie recorded that song, Harriet gave birth to Eric Hilliard Nelson on May 8, 1940. It was an era when many thought singing stars and motherhood didn't mix.
I know when Harriet was pregnant with Ricky and we were just on a very successful theater tour, and our then manager said, "That's going to wash you right up in show business, you know that, don't you?"
Ricky celebrated his first birthday by taking his first tentative steps into the outstretched arms of brother David.
It was one of those things where it's the older brother is responsible for the younger brother, and I always got it. You know, if something happened to Rick and I was quote-unquote in charge, so I became Mother Nelson for a long time.
From the beginning, Ricky created his own private world. He spent hours beside a living room heating vent beneath a radio console, listening to classical music.
Oh, you men, big and little, you're all alike. I cook and I bake for you, and what do I get? Nothing.
You're lucky. We get tummy aches, you know.
For 3 seasons, Ozzie, Harriet, and the band appeared on the Red Skelton radio show. Harriet shined playing straight man to Skelton's soon-to-be classic cast of characters. The Skelton show ended when Red received his draft notice. Ozzie, pushing 40 and too old to enlist, looked for a radio show of his own. This time, a radio show where he and Harriet could just be themselves. A novel concept, considering other radio shows starred former vaudevillians doing their shtick on the air. But another up-and-coming talent shared Ozzie's belief that real people are funny, too.
We always felt that the closer you got to the personality of the guy in real life who was doing the part or the key role in a show, the better off you were, because you could be natural. And Ozzie was always natural. He was a great talker.
The Ozzie Nelson Orchestra toured for the last time in the summer of 1944. On October 8th, their 9th wedding anniversary, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet premiered on Coast to Coast Radio.
What didn't you like about being a bachelor?
Well, I had to sew my own buttons on, wash out my own shirt, eat dinner alone.
But things are different now.
Yeah, I don't have to eat dinner alone anymore.
For the first 5 seasons of the radio show, Ozzie Nelson employed actors to play his sons. Beginning on February 20th, 1949, sons David and Ricky would play David and Ricky for the next 17 years.
I'm David Folk Thomas at the crossroads of the world, Times Square, New York City, and this is Street Fire. Which famous TV family would you like to be part of? We got the Nelsons, the Cosbys, the Bunkers, and the Osbournes.
Osbournes.
Osbournes?
100%.
Osbournes.
Osbournes?
I'll go with the Nelsons.
The Nelsons? Why do you want to be with the Nelsons?
They look like a pretty decent family.
Which family would you want to
The
start?
Nelsons.
The
I would
Nelsons?
like the Nelsons
Yeah.
better.
Why? I mean, they look perfectly
Because
fine.
they're an all-American family and they don't have any problems, and that's the kind of life I think I would want, even if it was just for fun.
Yeah, I'd have to go with these guys right here. They look kind of simple, down to earth.
You think you could pull something over on them?
Definitely.
David and Ricky gave ample evidence that they had inherited the Nelsons' athletic talent. And when they heard that Bing Crosby's son had appeared on their parents' Christmas show, David and Ricky figured it was time to see if they had inherited any show business genes. Ozzie tested them in a rehearsal before a live audience.
Rick got so many giant laughs. I mean, had to have been a horrible temptation, even though my father would say, well, I don't want my kids in show business. You know, I mean, here's somebody here who's a gold mine.
David, we're not trying to pry into your personal affairs, but why don't you just tell us about it? Maybe we can help you.
It's kind of silly, I guess. See, Grace Johnson invited me to her party Friday night, and I told her I'd come.
Well, that sounds very nice.
Yeah, but our team is supposed to play basketball Friday night, so I gotta tell her I can't make it.
Is David a dope pop?
Ricky, read your comic book.
When they first came around, they were kind of pains in the butt because they were sitting back there fooling with the drums and, and all like that, So the musicians didn't like it too much. But they became, professionals after a while. They're nice kids, both of them.
The Nelson family had moved to California in 1941 for the Red Skelton radio show. Ozzie bought a house in the Hollywood foothills at 1822 Camino Palmero. The boys attended local public schools, played with the neighborhood kids, and ate home-cooked meals with both parents. All they seemed to dread were long lectures from a driven dad.
And he talked and he talked and he had strong opinions and he was sweet about it. He wasn't arrogant or he wasn't unpleasant, but he was persistent. He talked.
In 1951, Ozzie Nelson talked Universal Pictures into shooting the script he and brother Don had written for the Nelson family's screen debut.
Say, don't I know you from somewhere?
Good morning. Don't tell me you finally decided to get up. Make a simple statement, right away Dave gets belligerent. The word is belligerent. Big man owns a dictionary.
Right from the start, Ricky performed like a scene-stealing natural, but David was painfully self-conscious.
They had this cowboy outfit that I wore and Rick wore one too, but mine had starch right in here. And plus thinking of myself as fat, every time I sat down, the starch in the shirt would just stick out like that, which I thought gave me a couple more inches of badness.
Without being too darling and too cute or anything. They were real people. And the picture, Here Come the Nelsons, showed them that way.
You and millions of other radio fans have wanted to see the Nelsons in all their hilarious glory. And here they are, the most listened to, the most laughed at, best loved family in radio.
Ozzie Nelson worked out an unprecedented 10-year contract with the fledgling ABC network. He would be the show's producer, director, and head writer. And to this day, no one has controlled one show so much for so long.
We had a clause in our contract that gave us total artistic control. I don't think I could function without artistic control because I think it's devastating to try to do any sort of entertainment by committee.
The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, starring the entire Nelson...
The television series premiered on October 3rd, 1952. America finally saw the Nelsons they heard on radio.
Here they are, America's favorite family, the Nelsons.
You better watch out, David. I may be small, but I'm awful mean.
Hey, take it easy, will you? What's all the noise about?
I'm in high school now, and I'm getting a little bit too old to get in these silly arguments with you.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, come on, calm down, will you, fellas?
You better tell him to be careful, Pop. I'm getting pretty strong, boy.
That's a laugh.
Oh, yeah? Have you seen my muscles lately?
What's the matter? Can't you find them either?
Roles were carved in granite. Ozzie, the slightly befuddled but loving dad with no identified occupation. Harriet, the loving wife, mom, and perpetual straight lady. David, the earnest, by-the-book older brother and perpetual straight man.
He wasn't going to listen to anybody.
I had to go back and live with her after the trial, and that was interesting, but it wasn't necessarily bad. It was difficult, but it was a learning process, and we both, learned to function, learn to be human with each other,
A few months after her wedding and the custody battle over Sam, Tracy Nelson was diagnosed with cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma. She'd gotten ill while shooting a pilot for a new TV series, Father Dowling Mysteries. Remarkably, the president of NBC Entertainment, Brandon Tartikoff, decided to stand behind her.
What I didn't know was that Brandon Tartikoff also had Hodgkin's disease. Now that showed me two things. One, aside from his knowledge of the illness, he cared about Tracy having this.
Tracy took over immediately. She found out everything she could about the disease and chose a very radical treatment. And I know how hard it was for her.
I give it to Billy for standing by her, you know, the way that he did. I thought it was really wonderful. I mean, because he was there. And when a lot of guys that I know that don't want anything to do with it, no matter how much you care about somebody, you hire somebody to take care of. But he really had a hands-on.
When Tracy went in for the first operation of what proved to be a successful treatment, Tom Harmon, a doer more than a talker, offered support.
My grandfather quietly got up and came over to me, and he had a scapula, a Sacred Heart medal. And he took it, and it was on a safety pin, and he pinned it to my gown, my hospital gown. And he said, "Deanne, this got me through the war, so it'll get you through the next few hours."
In 1989, a healthy Tracy Nelson worked with her grandmother on an episode of Father Dowling Mysteries.
Hello.
Harriet's tippling sister Agnes was inspired by a nun she remembered from childhood at St. Agnes Academy.
I just want you to know something. Wow. Father Dowling conned you into thinking I liked you, and vice versa. I guessed as much. I just want you to know something. You were a big help.
In 1990, Gunnar and Matthew scored with their song Love and Affection, making them the third generation of Nelsons to have a #1 hit. Grandmother Harriet looked on with pride. She made a point of getting to know her late son's youngest child. Sam showed her videos of his boarding school. She showed him Ozzie and Harriet outtakes and concert footage that Rick had given her.
She had a personality about her, a way about her, a charm about her, and a humor that was really dry, but she was so witty. And she was a perfect grandma, I have to say. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, but Harriet Nelson, the perfect grandmother. But she was. She really was.
Harriet Nelson spent the last 15 years of her life living alone in the Laguna Beach home that she and Ozzie had built in 1951. Friends and family say she never recovered from the loss of her husband and relied heavily on David for support. In late August 1994, she was admitted to South Coast Medical Center, suffering from congestive heart failure and emphysema. She stayed there for 4 weeks.
I said, "Mom, do you want to go home?" And she just nodded, yeah. And she wasn't home maybe overnight, and she was gone. But she did not want to die in that hospital, obviously. She wanted to die, you know, with the waves and the water and the house that she built.
Harriet Nelson died on Sunday afternoon, October 2nd, 1994. She was 85 years old.
You know, people have said to me, "What advice did your grandmother give you? Did you get from your grandmother about, you know, about anything?" And I always say the same thing because it sticks in my mind, and it's true. Take your makeup off before you go to bed.
In his eulogy, David, the sole survivor of the television Nelsons, departed from his usual role of straight man. As he looked out upon the graves of his father, mother, and brother, he ad-libbed, "Knowing my dad, he's probably got a production going. And now that they're all together again, I'm just wondering, who's playing David?"
You are watching Ozzie and Harriet.
David Nelson spent the better part of a decade putting his brother's debt-ridden estate in order. Through his efforts, Rick and Chris's 4 children reap a financial benefit from their father's music legacy.
I'll always say that David really took care of me, and if Pop were around, he would be very proud of Dave, because he went above and beyond, and really, I think David has really kept everybody together and kept everybody provided for. And Gunnar and I went through some really rough times. We were living out of our car for a while, and it was because of the stuff that David got together, I think, that we're doing all right now.
Nelsons and Harmons reunited for Matthew's wedding to lingerie model Yvette Steffens. By the late 90s, he and brother Gunnar planned to re-emerge with a new country sound, just as their father had wanted to do. Their mother, Chris, clean and sober since 1987, married TV producer Mark Tinker a year later. Chris's 1997 autobiography, Out of My Mind, chronicles her life as a Harmon, Nelson, and Tinker through her paintings. As of 1998, she and her brother Mark Harmon had not reconciled. After 4 seasons of father-dowling mysteries, Tracy Nelson appeared on Broadway in the musical Grease. She put her career on hold to spend more time with her daughter, Remy. And in 1997, she and husband Billy Moses separated. Sam Nelson plans to graduate from Boston College in 1999, becoming Ozzie's first grandchild to receive a university degree. He takes pride in his heritage, but embraces his anonymity.
And I'm just in the fortunate position that I didn't have to be a part of that. I guess I'm kind of living what he would have wanted to live, which is, you know, to be my own person, and to be known for what I loved, or to be known for what I represented on my own, as opposed to, you know, what other people thought of me, you know.
David Nelson, a commercial director, has been president of Casablanca Productions for 2 decades and married to Yvonne since 1975. In addition to his 2 sons by actress June Blair, David has raised Yvonne's 3 children by a previous marriage.
He's just there, like unconditionally, just there for you.
I feel like David is my father.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's no question in my mind. It's really frustrating to me, and people say, you know, David is your stepfather, and I'm like, no, he's my father.
I think he sleeps better at night. He seems happier to me than he has for a long time. Yeah, I don't think he'll ever get over missing his family.
The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet was the first and longest-running family situation comedy in television history. Other shows followed that reflected the values and the sensibility of their times, some say with more realism than the television Nelsons. Harriet, in her last years a big fan of The Cosby Show and Family Ties, privately said it was unfair to judge her show with a contemporary pair of eyes. Even when you do, and can see beyond the buzz cuts, the saddle shoes, and the cornball, gentle moments of truth reach across the years like the unforgettable pleasure of tutti frutti ice cream.
How's it taste?
Delicious.
That's why when I watch Seinfeld, I think of the Nelson Show a lot, because they just take a very simple thing and who stole the cookies, where are the cookies? And they could do 20 minutes on cookies, you know. But out of that conversation comes a lot of interesting sides of human beings. And Ozzie had that same type of talent.
When they sold it to NBC, they said the show will be about nothing, remember? And you could say that about Ozzie and Harriet. They said, well, it's all, you know, what the heck, it's just all so homey. Well, home is where the heart is.
What's wrong, David? You've hardly said a word all morning.
It's nothing, Mom.
Well, there's something bothering you. What is it?
It's nothing, really, Mom. David.
Harriet, please. You say it's nothing, David, is that right?
That's right, Pop.
All right, if it's nothing, it's nothing. We'll just forget it. It's here in the paper.
It is something.
Oh? I kind of thought you'd like to tell us about it. And what seems to be the trouble?
It's nothing, Pop.
Now is David a dope, Pop?
Ricky, read your comic book.
A made-for-TV movie about Ozzie and Harriet is in the works. It will reportedly examine their enduring marriage and home life. Don't expect anything too salacious about television's first couple. Their grandchildren, Gunnar and Tracy, are executive producers of the film.